My son thought my savings were his inheritance to claim early. He pushed a $400,000 mortgage across the table and said, "Sign this." I refused, and they sued me. Everyone believed their lies, but I had something stronger than their greed. Proof. What unfolded next turned their entire world upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in the living room that late afternoon, the golden light of the sun slipping through the curtains and stretching across the old wooden floorboards I had installed with my own hands so many years ago. The air felt heavy, too still, the kind of silence that makes every thought louder. My eyes rested on the family photographs lined along the mantel. Michael's graduation photo, the one where I stood beside him, beaming with pride. Sophie, in her wedding gown, was smiling as if she had married into a fairy tale. And in the middle of them all, the one picture I could barely look at without my chest tightening. My wife, Linda, in her kitchen apron, flour on her hands, laughing at some joke I had just made. I whispered into the emptiness, "Linda, if only you could see this. If only you could tell me what to do." I remembered the sacrifices as if they were burned into me. I worked as a plumber for decades, crawling under houses, carrying pipes heavier than some men could lift, waking up at dawn and working weekends. Every hour I worked, every dollar I put away, I told myself it was for the future of my son. When Michael was accepted into college, the tuition came to $60,000. $60,000. I wrote the checks, semester after semester, never once letting him feel the weight of it. I told myself, this is what fathers do. Later, when he graduated and got his first job, I wanted him to walk into that office with pride. I bought him a car, a shiny sedan worth $25,000, so he wouldn't have to worry about buses or used cars breaking down. I remember the look on his face when I handed him the keys. He hugged me and said, "Dad, I'll make you proud." And I believed him. Then came the wedding. Michael wanted it big, Sophie wanted it bigger. I told them to be careful, that a wedding lasts one day, but debt lasts a lifetime. But their eyes were already fixed on chandeliers and ballrooms. $15,000 came out of my pocket for the ceremony. I paid it without complaint because I thought, this is family, this is what parents do. I remember Sophie walking through the reception hall in her gown, holding her chin high like a princess, while I stood in the background, tired but happy that I had helped. I thought every dollar I had given them was an investment in their future, a way of giving them a foundation stronger than I ever had. But sitting there, staring at the photographs, all I felt was betrayal. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the house I had built with Linda, brick by brick, board by board, each corner holding memories of our life together. It was worth $600,000 now, maybe more, but to me, it was priceless. Every wall carried echoes of our laughter, every window framed moments of raising Michael, and every scratch on the floor was a story of family. I still see Linda in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her eyes soft when she would tell me, "Keep this house, Robert. This is where our love lives, even when we're gone." That house was more than wood and stone. It was the keeper of our history, our sacrifices, our love. To think that Michael and Sophie wanted to take it away, to sell it and push me toward some nursing home, made my stomach turn. Not because of the house alone, but because of what it meant. They weren't after shelter. They weren't after a place to raise their family. They were after money. They wanted to strip away the roof over my head to fund their lifestyle, expensive vacations, cars, restaurants where a single dinner cost more than my week's groceries. The thought of Sophie laughing with her friends in some luxury spa while I was forced to pack up the life Linda and I built, it made me clench my fists against the armrests of my chair. At first, the pain came like a blow. When Michael handed me those mortgage papers, my first reaction was shock. I kept asking myself, where did I go wrong? How did I raise a son who could look his own father in the eye and demand something so cruel? I sat in that living room for hours, the silence pressing down, questioning myself. Was I too generous? Did I make life too easy for him, so he thought everything should be handed over? The questions gnawed at me, leaving me hollow. But then my eyes drifted back to the photograph of Linda, smiling in her wedding dress. She had been the steady one, the voice of reason. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The sorrow, the confusion, they gave way to something sharper. Determination. I could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm, as if she were right there whispering, "Robert, they think you're weak, but I know you. You will protect what we built. You will protect the life we made." I sat back, the weight on my chest slowly turning into a different kind of heaviness. Not despair, but resolve. They wanted to treat me as if I were a helpless old man. They thought they could scare me with lawsuits, smear me with gossip, pressure me into giving up. They didn't know me at all. I had worked 40 years with my hands, building a life out of sweat and broken knuckles. I had buried the love of my life and kept walking forward. I was not about to let greed undo everything I had built. The room around me seemed to breathe with me as I looked at it closely. The wooden floor, polished by years of footsteps. The old armchair by the fireplace, its fabric worn thin where Linda used to sit and knit. The family photos lined up like sentries along the mantel, witnesses to the years of sacrifice. The faint scent of oak and dust mixed with the evening air. It was all mine, all part of me, and every corner carried the weight of memories that Michael and Sophie could never understand. I felt a slow-burning anger in me, but it wasn't the kind that made you reckless. It was the kind that turned cold, steady, controlled. I reached for the coffee table drawer and pulled out the keys to the old safe in my study. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. Inside that safe were more than papers. They were shields, weapons even. I opened the heavy door and pulled out the folder that held the deed to the house. The numbers stared back at me. $600,000 in value, and every penny of it mine. No bank, no cosigner, no lingering debt. This house was fully mine, earned and paid for. I also found the documents for my savings account, $200,000 sitting there untouched, the fruit of a lifetime of cautious living. I knew in that moment that these were not just pieces of paper. They were proof of my independence, and they would be the defense against the scheme my son and his wife had woven. As I placed the papers back in the safe, I felt calmer. I had something solid, something real. But I also knew this fight wasn't going to be about facts alone. It was going to be about perception, manipulation, and the stories they were already spinning. I pictured Sophie on the phone, her voice dripping with false sweetness, telling relatives how her poor husband was denied by his cold, selfish father. I could almost hear her rehearsed lines, and I could almost hear the whispers spreading through town. That was their weapon: emotion, lies, manipulation. Mine would have to be the truth, backed by evidence so undeniable it would cut through every lie like a blade. I sat back down in the living room, letting the weight of everything settle. My hand brushed against the armrest of the chair, the same chair where I once sat with little Michael on my lap, telling him stories about honesty, about working hard, about building a life you could be proud of. How far he had drifted from those lessons. I closed my eyes, feeling the burn of betrayal again, but this time there was something else layered beneath it. Clarity. I knew what had to be done. I stood, crossed the room, and opened the drawer where I kept my address book. My fingers traced over the names written in fading ink. Family, friends, old contacts from years gone by. But the one name I stopped at made me pause. Catherine Wells. My attorney, the woman who had helped me with my will years ago, who had guided me when Linda passed. She was sharp, steady, and unafraid of a fight. My thumb pressed against the paper as if I could feel her strength through it. I whispered into the quiet house, almost as if speaking to Linda again. They think I'll sit here and take it. They think age has made me soft. But they're wrong. They don't know who they're dealing with. My voice cracked a little, but the steel beneath it was real. I picked up the phone, my heart steady, my mind clear. The number was already memorized, etched into me from years of trust. I pressed the first digit and let my breath out slowly. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity. It was about protecting the love Linda and I had built, the life we had worked for, the future I refused to let them steal. Tomorrow I will meet with Catherine. Tomorrow this battle would begin in earnest. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, I knew one thing for certain. The game they thought they had already won was just getting started. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before dawn, the house still, and sat at the kitchen table with my hands around a warm mug. The quiet steadied me. Yesterday was for remembering. Today would be for doing. Grief had its hour, anger had its say, but neither would protect my home. Action would. I opened the notebook I keep in the junk drawer, drew a line across the top, and wrote 2 words in block letters. The bank. I dialed the number on the back of my statement and waited through the recorded menu. A young voice came on, bright and polite, and asked for my name and the last 4 digits of my Social Security. I told him I needed to freeze a savings account immediately. $200,000. He put me on hold, then returned with a measured tone and the questions they must ask. We set a verbal password, added a note that no wire or transfer could go through without it, and I asked for a printed confirmation to be mailed. Before he hung up, he thanked me for banking with them. I thanked him for listening. When I set the phone down, I felt a click inside, like a lock sliding home. I showered, shaved, pulled on the flannel that fits like honesty, and drove into town with a folder under my arm. Inside were the deed, current statements, and the short list of dates and quotes I had written last night. Catherine Wells kept her office above the barber shop, 2nd floor, with a glass door with gold letters. Her assistant waved me in. Catherine stood to greet me, sleeves rolled, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of presence that makes a room settle. We sat across her oak desk, and I told the story from the beginning. My kitchen table, the mortgage slid across the wood like a threat, the sentence about my age and how I didn't need money, the stare Sophie gave my walls as if she were pricing them. She listened without interrupting, the way a carpenter measures twice before cutting. When I finished, she tapped the folder. "Robert, we treat this like work," she said. "First, secure what is yours. Second, document everything. Third, prepare for formal action." She drafted a letter to the bank confirming the freeze and ordering that no third-party authorization would be accepted. Then she looked me in the eye and told me to record every call, save every message, and write down every conversation by time and subject. If they put anything in writing, keep it. If they make a threat, copy it. If they involve other people, gather the names. "What if they pull the town into it?" I asked. "Family and neighbors and folks from church." "Do not chase public opinion," she said. "Harvest it. People who lie usually lie loudly. Let them. We will use their volume as evidence." She sketched a simple plan. Confirm the freeze in person at the branch, sort my files into folders today, send her anything I gather, and sleep with my phone by the bed with the recorder ready. I left with instructions I could hold like tools. At the bank branch, the manager came out and shook my hand. We reviewed the freeze, added the password, and set a flag that nothing could move without me standing there with identification. He printed a summary and stamped it with today's date. I folded it behind the deed. When I stepped into the parking lot, the sky looked hard and clean. I breathed the cold air like a man washing his face. By the time I reached home, my phone had buzzed 3 times. Michael, then Michael again, then Sophie. I let each one roll to voicemail. I set the folder on the kitchen counter, opened the voice recorder app, and placed the phone face up. A car door slammed outside. I did not need to look to know whose it was. Their footsteps on my porch sounded like they owned it. I opened the door before they could pound, stepped back, and said, "Come in if you plan to speak calmly. We are being recorded." They stood by the table, both of them in coats that cost more than any coat I have ever owned. Michael tried a smile that sat wrong on his face. "Dad," he said, "we just want to clear the air." Sophie said nothing at first. She scanned the room like it was a listing. When she did speak, it came like a script. "Family helps family. You'll regret choosing money over us." Her voice carried that sweet sting she uses when she wants something. I pulled out a chair and sat. "Talking is fine," I said. "Demanding is not. This house is blood and sweat. No one gets to take it from me." Michael said they were under a deadline. He said the inspection date was set. He said I was risking their future. I told him I was protecting mine. He tried again. Interest, promises, gratitude, words that did not add up to a plan. Sophie softened her eyes and talked about children and safe streets. I said children are safest around honest adults. She looked at my phone and asked if I was recording. I told her yes, for clarity. Her face cooled. The talk lost its sugar. When they saw that the door would not open, they left it and walked out. The next hours turned into a list. I made copies of the deed and scanned them into a folder labeled House, $600,000, so I would not forget what was at stake. I saved the bank statements and the freeze confirmation in the bank. I downloaded voicemails to a folder named Calls and took screenshots of texts into texts, numbering each sequence and adding notes. I opened a fresh notebook and made a log with 3 columns: time, event, and source. Order calmed me the way a level calms a long board. Around 2 in the afternoon, a neighbor sent a message that said, "You might want to see this." It was a link to Facebook. I clicked. Sophie had posted a photo of herself looking small and brave, with a caption that sounded like a prayer and read like a knife. "Imagine," she wrote, "your father-in-law sitting on piles of savings while refusing to help his only son buy a safe home. Imagine choosing money over family. We are heartbroken. We only want stability for our future child." Below it, the comments stacked and grew. Shame on him. Selfish. Doesn't he know he can't take it with him? People I knew, people I had bought raffle tickets from and stood beside at ball games, typing judgments as if they had been in my kitchen. I captured the post as it first appeared, then every comment as it grew, time-stamp by time-stamp. I pasted them into a document, added the URL, and saved it to the social folder. I emailed Catherine the file and wrote one line in my log: "Public pressure begins." Then I put both palms on the table and breathed slowly until the heat left my face. Record, not react. That was the rule. While I worked, unknown numbers rang twice. I let them go. The machine took their words. Their words became mine to keep. I walked the house like a foreman at shift's end. In the living room, I checked the windows, not from fear, but because order sharpens the mind. I paused at the archway where I had penciled Michael's height each birthday. The marks were still there, thin as branches. In the garage, I ran a rag over the workbench and felt the click of the ratchet in my palm, heard a boy's laugh inside the memory. The house gave back its quiet, and I took strength from the way wood answers to hands that have learned it. 2 calls came from numbers I did not know. I saved the voicemails without replying. A third came from Brian, Michael's friend from college. He sounded uneasy and said that last month Michael asked to borrow money and promised to repay it when family money came through. He said those exact words. I thanked him and asked if he would put it in writing. He agreed. I forwarded his note to Catherine and added a new tab in my binder titled Witness, then wrote his name there in thick, steady letters. As the rooms turned gold, I called Catherine. "Good," she said. "Keep gathering, keep calm, change your passwords, and call the utilities to add watchwords." I wrote each instruction down, then went to my desk and did them one by one. New passwords, 2-factor on the email, alerts on my credit, a call to the power company, the water company, and the phone company. Each gave me a confirmation number. I printed each number and slid the pages into clear sleeves. The binder felt heavier when I snapped the rings shut. Before bed, I stopped by Linda's picture on the mantel and touched the frame. The streetlight lay a soft stripe across the glass. I spoke out loud because some words need air. "They think I will say yes to keep the peace," I told her. "I am not the yes they imagine. I am the same man who held the ladder while you painted the trim. The same man who comes back to the job until it is done right." The house settled as if to nod. I slept. Morning brought clear light. I drove back to Catherine's office with the binder and a flash drive. We spread everything across her table. She stacked and labeled with neat hands: financial, messages, social, witness. It looked like a case before it became one. She dictated a preservation letter to Michael and Sophie, ordering them not to delete a thing, and drafted a follow-up to my bank requesting printed histories of any attempted access. Watching her work felt like watching a bridge being set across a river, each piece braced to carry weight. Catherine asked if I felt safe. I told her I did, but wary. "Wariness is healthy," she said, and asked if I wanted a no-trespass letter prepared. "Not yet," I said. "We will keep that tool ready," she answered, and handed me a checklist. Secure accounts, monitor credit, keep a log, record calls, preserve social media, contact utilities, little boxes beside each line. I liked checking them. The list gave my hands something firm to do. On the way home, I stopped at the diner. Sarah poured coffee without asking and set down a slice of lemon pie. "How are you, Robert?" she asked. "Working the problem," I said. She squeezed my shoulder once. At a corner table, two men argued about taxes and said the word inheritance, the way some folks say weather. I paid, left a larger tip than usual, and stepped back into the sharp air with the taste of lemon still bright on my tongue. An envelope from the bank waited in my mailbox. Inside was the written confirmation of the freeze, the new password notation, and today's date. I slid it into the binder as soon as I reached the kitchen. Then I checked the backyard gate and stood under the gray sky for a minute. I thought about the garage again, the click of the ratchet, the way Michael grinned when he got the angle right. And I felt that old tug between past and present. Memory is warm. Boundaries are warmer. A new text arrived from an unknown number. A screenshot of Sophie's latest post in a community group with thousands of members. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. The comments moved fast. I copied the link, took screenshots, and saved them with the rest. Then I set the phone face down and let the urge to defend myself pass like a wave that chooses not to break. Facts first, feelings later. That was the discipline. At 9 that night, Catherine called with a list of what she had sent and what she needed. She asked for the kitchen audio and the names of neighbors who had reached out. I sent them while we spoke. She had prepared another draft for me to sign in the morning, a letter instructing Michael and Sophie to route all contact through her from now on. Then she added one more sentence. "I am also preparing an emergency petition to limit contact if they escalate. We may not use it, but we will not be late." Before sleep, I opened the safe and looked at the deed again. The paper is plain, but in my hands I hear Linda laugh, smell the Sunday roast, see a boy tear down the hall. I placed it back and turned the wheel until the lock clicked. I washed my cup and hung the towel straight. These small gestures do not stop storms. They remind you who you are while the storm passes. The house breathed calm around me, a big quiet animal that knows its keeper. I slept, woke, and sat in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind pull at the eaves. I told myself the same line I once told Michael when he fought a stuck bolt on his bike. Slow and steady. Feel the thread. Do not strip it. I repeated it until the words calmed my chest. Dawn came pale and clean. I dressed, pocketed a pen, and drove back to Catherine's office, ready to sign what needed signing. Catherine met me with a firm handshake and a stack of papers clipped together. At the top, my name. Below, the header that reads in clear type, "Demand to cease harassment and defamation. Preservation notice." She walked me through the paragraphs, the citation to state statutes, the instruction to retain every text, voicemail, and post. "If they delete anything now," she said, "a judge will not look kindly on it." I signed my name with a pen that felt heavier than its weight. She made copies, slid one to me, and set the originals aside to send certified. Then she handed me a thin draft of another document. "If they escalate, this is the petition for a temporary order limiting contact," she said. "We may not need it, but we will not be unprepared." I read the first page and felt the newness of the ground we might have to stand on. It did not scare me. It sobered me. I tucked the draft into the folder. Catherine asked what I would do with the rest of my day. "Oil the back door," I said. "It squeaks." She smiled. "A small order is a kind of victory. Keep going." On the walk back to my truck, the sun warmed my cheek and the wind pushed down the street. The barber waved a comb, and I lifted the folder like a salute. I drove home without the radio and parked under the maple. At the kitchen table, I set Catherine's draft on the binder and wrote a line in my log. Tools gathered, lines drawn, ready. I slid the certified envelopes into my bag and locked the safe. Then I said it aloud so the walls would hear. They think I am an easy mark. Tomorrow they will learn I am not. And I meant every single word today. On my way home from those calls, I stopped at the post office and filled out 3 green certified slips with careful block letters. I mailed a copy of the bank letter to myself for postmark proof, mailed a copy to Catherine, and mailed one more to the branch manager with a short cover note. The clerk asked if I wanted return receipts. I said yes. Paper travels slowly, but it leaves tracks. I bought a fresh notebook at the counter display and wrote evidence on the cover with a felt-tip pen. I swung by the hardware store for printer paper and envelopes. Tom, who has cut me deals on pipe for 15 years, looked past me once before meeting my eyes. "Heard some talk," he said, voice careful. I said there was a lot of talk and most of it would not hold up next to records. He nodded, slid the paper across the counter, and lowered his voice. "You've always paid your bills. That still means something." I wrote the time and his words in my log before I pulled out of the lot. Back at the house, I sat at the computer and froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, 1 page at a time, answering questions only a person who lived my life would know. A pop-up asked for a reason, and I typed, "Preventing unauthorized accounts." Then I drove to the UPS store and had my notes notarized, a 1-page statement describing the kitchen conversation by time and subject. The notary stamped it and slid it back. Little stamps do not look like armor, but they are. Before supper, Mrs. Lee tapped on the doorframe and stepped in with 2 lawn chairs under her arm. "If anyone sits watching your house again," she said, "we will notice." She set a chair on my porch and left the other with me. Some people offered opinions online. Real neighbors offered time. I thanked her, wrote it in the log, and felt the quiet strength that comes when a community quietly corrects itself without speeches. Later, I pulled down the garage ladder and climbed into the low attic, where I keep toolboxes I no longer use every week. I opened the red steel box that belonged to my father and counted the sockets in their tray, each one scuffed, a few engraved with his initials. I took pictures for insurance, not because I feared theft, but because listing what you value helps you remember why you are fighting. I laid the ratchet back in its cradle and slid the drawer shut. That night, I set 3 stamped envelopes by the door, each with a green card clipped to the top, and checked the addresses one last time. I placed the binder, the flash drive, and my notebook into the canvas bag I used when I still did weekend calls. "They think I am old," I told the room. Maybe I am. But this is what old looks like when it counts. Thorough, steady, hard to move. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to the dull knock of mail sliding through the slot and to that first quiet minute when a house decides what kind of day it will be. The floor was cold. The kettle hissed. I poured coffee, turned the envelope over in my hands, and saw my name printed in block letters that looked angrier than ink should ever look. I opened it at the same kitchen table where Michael had once dropped a mortgage across the wood like a dare. Inside, page after page, a civil complaint demanding $380,000, written as if it were nothing to demand a lifetime's work on a Tuesday. They claimed I had promised to help them buy a house. They claimed I was forgetful now. They wrote that I had grown unfit to manage my affairs. I read the words slowly, once, then again, like a man tasting something bitter to be sure of the poison. I did not slam anything. I did not swear. I folded the packet back into the envelope and laid it flat, the way you lay a splinter down on a clean cloth before you take it out. I called Catherine Wells and told her the packet had arrived. "Bring it intact," she said. "Don't pull staples. Don't mark anything. We'll answer the story with a record." I set the papers back as they came, slid the envelope into a flat box, and drove into town with the careful hands of a man carrying a pane of glass. The barber downstairs was opening up and waved. I climbed the narrow stairs to Catherine's office, the kind that announces every foot with an honest creak. She met me at the door with a legal pad and a pen that clicked like a metronome. We sat, and she had me walk through the last month in a straight line: the kitchen demand, the refusal, the flood of calls, the freeze on the savings account, the screenshots, the log. She nodded and said, "Good. Paper wins where volume fails." We drafted our response that morning. For every accusation, she attached a page that could not be argued with. The deed that says this house is mine, free and clear, worth about $600,000. The bank's letter confirming I froze $200,000 in savings and set a password no one else could speak. Screenshots of the posts where they told the town I was selfish, annotated with timestamps. A transcript of the kitchen conversation, each minute, marked the way a carpenter marks a board before a cut. She tabbed everything with neat blue flags and slid it into a binder thick enough to stop a door. At noon, she ordered me to eat a sandwich and drink water. After lunch, she slid a simple instruction across the desk. "Keep collecting," she said. "Record calls. Save texts. Do not reply in public. If they pull the town into this, let them. We will harvest their words. Courts like paper." She looked over the top of her glasses. "And Robert, sleep. Old bones fight better when they're rested." I left her office with a folder under my arm and started toward my truck. Halfway down the block, I turned toward St. Mark's out of habit. The bell tower stood against a pewter sky. Before I reached the steps, my phone rang. Father Raymond's voice had the careful tone men use when they're trying to stand in 2 rooms at once. "Robert," he said, "Michael and Sophie stopped by. They're worried about you. They said you've been confused. They said you promised to help and then forgot." He paused long enough that I could hear the wind push past the mouthpiece, and then he added, "They asked me to talk to you, to guide you." In the background, I heard Sophie's bright, practiced voice, soft enough to sound concerned and sharp enough to cut. "We're just worried he can't make decisions anymore." My hands went cold, not at the church, not with my pastor. I stood at the bottom of the steps and spoke into the gray. "Father, I will not argue in your office, but I have documents, I have recordings. I have a house my wife and I built, and a mind that still knows which way a thread turns." He exhaled, and his breath crackled over the line. "Bring me what you have," he said, "not to judge. To be clear when people ask." I said I would, and I did. That afternoon, I left a neat packet with the secretary, the bank letter, the transcript, the freeze order, and 3 pages of my log. I included a photo of Linda at our front steps, smiling into the son she loved, because I wanted him to see the home they were trying to call confusion. 2 days later, Catherine filed our answer. Every exhibit was labeled, every page numbered. Her advice stayed the same. Save your breath for the room that counts. Eat, walk, do one small chore each day that ends in order. Let your hands remember that most problems yield to steadiness. I slept with my phone face down on the nightstand and woke every hour anyway. That happens when you are waiting for a gavel. The hearing came the next week. Courthouses are built for mornings. The wood glows, the floors shine. The benches hold more worry than wood. I sat behind Catherine and watched the clerk carry files the way bricklayers carry bricks. Michael and Sophie came in with their attorney and took the other table. Michael wore the blue tie I bought him for interviews. Sophie wore black and a clean, flat expression like a polished stone that means to bruise. She kept her eyes on the judge's bench and away from me. Their lawyer went first. He told a story that never happened. He said I had promised at birthdays, at holidays, at quiet dinners when fathers lay their hands over their sons' hands and make oaths. He said I had urged them to shop for a home, that I wanted grandchildren to have a yard here, that I was a man of my word until time blurred the edges. He said confusion had made me cruel. He spoke in a tone meant to sound like concern. I watched the judge's pen. It barely moved. The room itself seemed to resist their story. Light fell in tall rectangles across the floor, dust turning in it like slow snow. A retired teacher from my street sat with her hands folded, her face set the way faces set when truth is bent. Two college kids whispered until the bailiff's look planed them smooth. Even the heat vents made a steady sound like breath, patient and unimpressed. I felt the weight of all the ordinary disputes settled here, and it steadied me. Catherine rose, and the room went steady. "Your Honor," she said, "we'll use paper first, then voices." She began with the deed. She walked me through it with questions so simple they could only be answered straight. "Is this your home?" "Yes." "Any mortgage?" "No." "How long have you owned it?" 36 years. "Recent appraisal?" "Yes." "Approximate value?" $600,000. The bank letter came next. "Is this your account?" "Yes." "Did you freeze it on this date?" "Yes." "Did you set a password?" "Yes." "Did you instruct the bank to require your voice for any transaction?" "Yes." She moved to my log. "Is this your handwriting?" "Yes." "Did you make these entries as events occurred?" "Yes." Finally, she brought out the small recorder and asked to play a short clip. The judge nodded. Michael's voice came through the speakers in that quiet wooden room like a saw through soft pine. "We never thought you'd fight. Our lawyer said most elderly people settle." The sentence landed, heavy and exact. You could feel attention settle like dust. Their attorney stood and objected to tone, to context, to fairness. The judge lifted a hand. "Sit, counsel. I have ears." I heard what I heard. She turned to me. "Mr. Miller, did you ever promise in writing to give your son and his wife $380,000? "No, Your Honor. Did you ever promise out loud to do so?" "No." "Did you tell them you would not co-sign a mortgage?" "Yes." "Did you tell them before they signed anything?" "Yes." She turned to the other table. "Counsel, where is your writing?" He talked about families and trust and how fathers sometimes speak without paper. The judge looked over her glasses. "Courts enforce contracts, counsel. They do not write them from sentiment." Sophie began to cry. It started like a small storm. She tried to hide behind her hands, and then became a show, shoulders shaking, breath catching. Michael stared at the table grain as if it might spell rescue. Their lawyer tried a new route. He said this was the sad case of a once generous father whose mind had become, in his word, inconsistent. Catherine asked to show one page. The judge allowed it. On that page, lined up in quiet columns, were charges for first-class flights, a Las Vegas weekend, luxury dinners, and a gaming setup that cost more than some people's rent. It did not accuse. It simply sat there and told the truth about priorities. Catherine offered a notarized statement from Brian, one of Michael's friends, explaining that Michael had asked to borrow money and promised to repay him when family money came through. The judge read it, then asked Michael if he had used that phrase. He said he could not recall. Catherine asked the reporter to play back a different clip from the kitchen recording. The words came again, this time with the weary rhythm of a truth that wants to be done speaking. "We never thought you'd fight. Our lawyer said most elderly people settle." The judge looked at Michael for a long second that felt like a year. "This court sits to enforce contracts, not to create them from sentiment," she said. "I see no contract. I see pressure. I see spending that makes a mockery of the hardship you allege. And I see, in your own words, an attempt to leverage age into money." She let the silence do its work. Then she read the order she had written while counsel argued feelings. The complaint is dismissed. The defendant's motion for fees is granted for $40,000. The clerk will prepare the judgment. Counsel will confer on logistics. The gavel came down like a valve snapping shut. Pressure released. Flow corrected. Sophie made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Michael's jaw moved once and then didn't. Their lawyer tried the word misunderstanding again, and the judge answered without changing her tone. Misunderstanding does not post on Facebook. Misunderstanding does not call a pastor to whisper incompetence. Misunderstanding does not ask a court to build a promise out of air. We were done. The pews released people the way a shoreline releases waves, gently and with a little pull, and I watched how strangers looked at Michael and Sophie with the polite distance we grant to those who have just been told no by someone with authority. No one cheered, no one hissed. The quiet held. In that quiet, I remembered the first time I took Michael into a courthouse on a field trip in 4th grade, how he had marveled at the seal, how he had whispered that the room felt like a promise. Promises, I thought, are kept here with paper and patience, not tears. In the hallway, their attorney steered them to a bench. Sophie looked at me with eyes that wanted to be knives. Michael lifted his chin as if a boy inside him were asking for a ladder. I could not build it. Catherine raised her hand without looking and said, "Not here, and not to him. If you have words, use your lawyer." She and I walked down the marble stairs into the noon light that felt clean. She said the order would be signed by late afternoon. A stamped copy would be in my mailbox in a day or two, and I should expect noise, calls, texts, more posts, but no movement that matters. Orders move things. Noise does not. "Go home," she said. "Sweep something. Put your tools in order. Let your hands remind your heart that you still run your own house." On the truck hood, I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines with a pen that still smelled faintly of the hardware aisle. Complaint dismissed. Fees awarded. Finish small jobs. Then I drove home without the radio and let the rhythm of the tires do the talking. The maples on our street were shaking like dogs after rain. The front door stuck a little, and I made a note to plane the edge before the cold set in. The house met me the way a faithful animal does, with quiet recognition. I set the folder on the counter and took the deed and the fresh order from the safe. 2 sheets. Between them lived all the work Linda and I had done. I put them back and turned the wheel until the lock made its small, satisfying click. A knock came while I was still standing there. Mrs. Lee held a paper plate wrapped in foil and a look that mixed relief and rebuke for anyone who would ever doubt me. "Cinnamon rolls," she said, still warm. We stood in the doorway and talked about the weather the way people do when the big thing has already been said by someone in a robe. After she left, I sat at the table and ate one slowly. The sugar steadied me more than the coffee had. Late afternoon brought a call I let slide to voicemail. Michael's voice was careful and thin. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk. This got out of hand. We can fix it. Call me." I listened twice and felt nothing I could use. The judge had shown us how to speak now. I washed the plate, dried it, and put it away. The house rested. Near dusk, Father Raymond called. He thanked me for giving him the packet. He said he had read it. He said he had replied to Sophie's last message with a reminder that sanctuaries are for prayer, not leverage. He told me he would keep the parish out of this storm. "Come Sunday," he said, "sit where you and Linda always sat. Let the music do its work." I told him I would. He chuckled and promised not to preach on civil procedure. When night settled, I went to the garage and pulled down the ladder to the short attic where old boxes wait. I set my father's red toolbox on the joists and opened it. The sockets were in their tray, each one scarred and sure. I clicked the ratchet once. That sound has always steadied me. Down in the garage, I oiled the back door hinge and tightened 2 loose screws on a cabinet Linda used for canning. Small work, small order, small proof that this life is still mine to maintain. I slept like a man who has found the leak and shut the valve. Morning came with air that smelled like rain and the sound of a truck down the block. The mail landed early. Inside the thin envelope was the stamped order with its raised seal and the case number that will live in my file drawer longer than I will. I slid it behind a tab that Catherine had labeled Court and called to tell her it had arrived. "Eventually, they will pay the fees," she said. "People who spend like that don't enjoy paying the debts they create, but they pay when paper tells them to." Just before noon, the parish number showed on my phone. Father asked how I was. "Steady," I said. He told me a rumor or two had tried to take root, but Sunday's music would drown them for anyone with ears left. He asked if he could drop by. I told him I was fine, but grateful, and that I would see him at Mass. After we hung up, I leaned on the back fence and looked at the garden that had gone to seed in the corners. I pulled on gloves and started at the nearest bed. Dirt does not care about gossip. Dirt listens only to hands and seasons. I cleaned one rectangle of earth until it looked like a promise kept. I edged one path until its line matched the line I felt return inside my chest. By late afternoon, the light had gone the color of old honey. A breeze came down from the river, and the maple behind the house gave a slow, pleased shiver. I sat at the table and opened my notebook. I wrote one sentence as plain as I could make it. Today, the plan to take my house and my savings failed in a room where truth outweighs noise. I added another line, meant only for me. There will be consequences, not because I demand them, but because gravity applies to lies when they hit a record. I stood and spoke to Linda's picture the way I do when a day earns words. "They thought age made me easy to move," I said. "They thought a gavel would scare me. They thought a priest would shame me. They were wrong. It was not bragging. It was orientation, like setting a compass before a walk. I felt taller than I had in months. The house agreed, settling its timbers with a contented sigh I hadn't heard in many months before. Before turning in, I made a short list for tomorrow. Plane the door, call the insurance agent, and give them the case number. Schedule a meeting with the planner to review beneficiaries and titles. Ask Catherine about a letter reminding them to route all contact through counsel. Walk in the park. Don't answer bait. Let the order do the talking. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the soft dark until the house settled around me again. Feeling dismissed and treated as if your voice no longer counts is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and to receive justice, comment the keyword, justice. Now let's see what they do to change it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The weeks that followed the trial unfolded in a strange quiet, the kind that feels like the air after a storm has finally spent itself. At first, I woke every morning half expecting another envelope, another demand, another ambush waiting in the mailbox. But the days passed, and what arrived was different. Bills? Yes. Flyers? Yes. But also letters of support from neighbors, old friends, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Notes slipped under my door that read, "We should have known better," or "We're sorry for believing what wasn't true." One morning, I opened a card written in the careful script of Mrs. Hanson, who lived across the street for 30 years. Inside, she wrote, "Robert, I never doubted your kindness. I regret that I let their words color my judgment. Please know the neighborhood is on your side." I folded the card and set it on the mantel beside Linda's photo. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of ease. The house seemed to breathe differently. The floorboards didn't creak under suspicion anymore. The walls didn't press in with whispers of betrayal. The home was still mine, legally, spiritually, and in every way that mattered. Michael and Sophie were not so fortunate. News travels fast in small towns, and faster still when it smells of scandal. I heard through the grapevine, through voices that used to gossip behind my back, but now spoke with a mix of pity and righteousness, that Michael had lost his job. His employer had called him into the office after the trial transcripts made their way into the public record. A man who conspires to cheat his own father doesn't inspire confidence in clients. Contracts dried up. Trust dissolved. Within 2 weeks, his position was terminated due to professional conduct concerns. I pictured him standing there, holding a box of his belongings, wearing the same blue tie I bought him for interviews, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry. Almost? Sophie didn't fare much better. The BMW she had paraded around town as if the car itself could prove her superiority was repossessed in front of her condo building. Neighbors watched as the tow truck hooked it up, the sleek black machine powerless against a chain and a winch. She had posted pictures of herself behind that wheel with captions like, "Hard work pays off, though most of that hard work had been mine." Now, the same neighbors who once envied her whispered about the irony. With the condo unpaid and the debts mounting, the bank moved in. Letters of foreclosure, notices taped to doors, phone calls unanswered until phones were disconnected. Eventually, they left town. The story went that they had packed what they could into rented vans and driven to North Dakota, to Sophie's parents' modest house, from BMWs and condos to basement bedrooms and borrowed couches. That was their new reality. Meanwhile, I remained in the house Linda and I had built, and for the first time in months, I felt ownership, not just in legal terms, but in spirit. I tended the yard. I repaired the squeaky back gate. I planted tomatoes in the spring soil, hands deep in dirt that didn't care about lawsuits or lies. Neighbors came by to help, to share coffee, to sit in the old chairs on the porch. Slowly, the house filled with voices again, voices of support, of fellowship, of apology. The silence that once pressed down on me was replaced by the hum of a community that had remembered its conscience. One evening, after finishing dinner alone at the kitchen table, I leaned back and stared at Linda's photo. Her smile seemed different now, lighter, as if she had known this ending all along. "We did it, Lynn," I whispered. "They tried to tear it apart, but we held the line." The kettle whistled, sharp and steady, and for once I let it sing a little longer before moving. The sound felt like a song of victory. I found peace in small things, in sweeping the porch, in folding laundry and feeling the warmth of fabric straight from the dryer, in the clink of tools as I organized the garage. Every simple act reminded me that this life was mine to keep and care for. And I noticed something. My sleep deepened. The dreams that had been crowded with images of courtrooms and betrayals were replaced with ordinary dreams, walking in a park, repairing a fence, laughing with neighbors. Peace doesn't arrive like a trumpet. It creeps in quietly, one night of rest at a time. Michael and Sophie, on the other hand, seemed to fade from the social world entirely. Their Facebook pages disappeared. Their names were no longer heard at church, at grocery stores, or at community gatherings. People stopped asking how they were. Their absence was treated as inevitable, like a branch falling off in a storm. I knew from one phone call Michael had attempted a week after the ruling that they wanted to fix things. But I didn't answer. The voicemail sat untouched. A father can forgive in his heart, but forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means letting go completely. One Sunday after service, Father Raymond placed a hand on my shoulder. "You held firm, Robert," he said. "Not in anger, but in truth. There's a difference." His words stayed with me. That was what gave me peace. Not that Michael and Sophie had been humbled, but that I had not let their betrayal redefine who I was. I had stood in truth, and truth in the end had held. Neighbors began inviting me again. Potlucks, small gatherings, evenings at the VFW hall where veterans told stories louder than the jukebox. At first I hesitated, worried the whispers might linger. But when I showed up, people greeted me warmly. "Glad you came, Robert," they said. "You belong here." And I realized how deeply I had missed belonging. In those gatherings, I began sharing parts of my story, not as a complaint, but as a caution. Parents, I would say, do not mistake money for love. I had paid $60,000 for Michael's college, $25,000 for his car, and $15,000 for his wedding. I had thought generosity was the same as guidance. But love without boundaries grows into entitlement, and entitlement eats away at respect. Parents must give, yes, but they must also draw lines. Otherwise, you raise not children, but tyrants who believe the world owes them everything. To the younger folks, I said something else. Don't ever think your parents owe you a house, or a savings account, or a retirement fund. What they owe you is their care, their time, their lessons. The rest is a gift, not a debt. Gratitude should weigh heavily than expectation. Respect should be the currency of a family, not dollars and cents. And to anyone who asked what I learned about human nature, I told them the truth. Greed blinds. It doesn't matter if it comes from a stranger or from your own blood. Greed turns love into leverage. But truth, steady, stubborn truth, has gravity. Lies can float for a while, but eventually they crash. Justice may walk slowly, but it does arrive. The contrast between my peace and their downfall became clearer as weeks rolled into months. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Michael and Sophie were struggling even in North Dakota. Michael had taken odd jobs, nothing stable. Sophie worked part-time at a shop, far from the glamorous life she once flaunted. They quarreled often, loud enough for the neighbors to complain. I didn't gloat when I heard it, but I also didn't feel guilty. Choices have weight. They had made theirs. As for me, my life began to bloom in new directions. I joined a community gardening group. Twice a week, we met at the old park on Maple Street, where volunteers tended rows of vegetables and flowers. Something was healing and turning soil, planting seeds, watering sprouts. Each new leaf felt like a declaration that life goes on, and it can be good. Children from the neighborhood ran between rows, laughing, learning how carrots grow, how bees work. Their laughter filled the air the way Linda used to fill our kitchen, and I smiled without sadness. One evening, after finishing work in the garden, I sat on a bench and looked at the sky streaked with orange and pink. A woman named Carol, a widow who had also faced betrayal from her own children, sat beside me. She said softly, "You don't need their apology to live free." I nodded. She was right. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need their voices anymore. What I needed, I already had: dignity, self-respect, and a community that saw me for who I was. Later that night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I whispered to myself, I don't need them anymore. I have myself, and that's enough. The words felt heavy and liberating all at once. For months I had carried the burden of betrayal like a stone in my chest. Speaking those words let me finally set it down. I never returned Michael's call. I never answered Sophie's message that arrived months later, a half-hearted apology scribbled in rushed handwriting. I tore it in half and dropped it in the bin. Some bridges aren't burned by anger. They're dismantled, piece by piece, by years of greed and disrespect. By the time apologies arrive, there's nothing left to cross. And that, I realized, was okay. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Some end in boundaries, in separation, in the recognition that blood alone does not define family. Respect does. And if respect is gone, then so is the bond. As spring gave way to summer, the house glowed in evening light, peaceful and steady. I painted the front porch railings white again. I planted marigolds along the walk. I sat with neighbors on warm nights, drinking iced tea and telling stories. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. One Sunday afternoon, I looked out at the garden I had built with the community and smiled. "Linda," I said softly, "we made it. I'm still here, and I'm free." The wind rustled the leaves as if in agreement. I know there are more chapters ahead. Perhaps I'll volunteer more. Perhaps I'll join a charity group or teach children how to garden. Perhaps I'll simply enjoy the quiet days, the steady rhythm of a life no longer overshadowed by betrayal. But one thing is certain: I will live on my terms, not theirs. I have learned that self-respect is more valuable than inheritance. That peace is more precious than reconciliation with those who would harm you. And that the truth, quiet, patient, unwavering, always finds its way to the surface. As I closed the curtains that night, I felt no anger, no grief, just clarity. My life was mine again, and it was enough. The mornings became gentler after everything settled. I woke not to the weight of fear or the dull ache of betrayal, but to the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. The sunlight would slip across the curtains, warming the wooden floor of my bedroom, and I would rise slowly, stretch, and breathe without that heaviness pressing on my chest. Peace was not something that arrived all at once. It crept in, a little more each day, like dew gathering on grass. I began to care for the garden again. The soil that had sat untouched during months of court battles and angry phone calls now called me back, and I answered with my hands, my tools, and my patience. Tomatoes, cucumbers, and beans grew in neat rows. I planted marigolds near the walkway, their orange and yellow blossoms catching the morning light. The act of kneeling, digging, and planting gave me more healing than any verdict in court could. Every sprout felt like a small victory, proof that life continues even when storms try to strip it bare. The house itself, once filled with tension, began to feel like a sanctuary again. I painted the porch railing white, patched up a loose step, and even fixed the old swing on the back porch. The creak of the chain no longer sounded like a ghost of past arguments. It was simply the sound of wood and metal doing what they were meant to do. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The living room echoed with laughter again, not from family, but from neighbors who visited, carrying pies or just their company. I joined a reading group at the library. Every Thursday, a circle of us, men and women with gray hair, lined faces, and stories longer than novels, would gather around a table and discuss books. Sometimes the conversations drifted to our lives. More than once, someone would glance at me and say, "You went through hell, Robert, but you're stronger for it." I would smile and reply, "Stronger maybe, but what I really am is free." And I meant it. It was during one of those afternoons after returning from the library that I found the letter. A simple envelope, my name written in handwriting I knew too well. Michael's. I held it for a long time before opening it, as if the paper itself had weight. Inside, he wrote words of regret. He said he was sorry, that he had been blind with greed, that Sophie had pushed him, but that he had made his own choices. He asked if we could talk, if we could rebuild, if I could find it in my heart to forgive. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. I did not answer. Forgiveness in my heart is one thing, but reopening doors that were closed for good is another. I whispered to myself, I don't need his words anymore. I don't need his apology to be whole. I already have what matters. And I shut the drawer. I learned something important in that moment. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by respect. Respect is the currency that holds people together, and without it, the bond is worthless. I had given Michael every chance, every dollar, every ounce of trust, and he had chosen betrayal. That cannot be undone by ink on paper. Still, the letter served a purpose. It reminded me of how far I had come. Months ago, I would have clung to those words, desperate for reconciliation. Now I felt no need. My life had moved forward, and my peace did not depend on him. That was the greatest freedom of all. In the quiet of those days, I often thought about lessons for parents. I realized that loving your children does not mean handing them everything. I had thought generosity was love, but love without boundaries turns into poison. Parents must teach responsibility, not entitlement. If I could speak to every mother and father, I would say, give, but also guide. Protect, but also demand respect. Because when children grow up believing they are owed the world, they forget to value the very people who raised them. And lessons for children: no parent owes you a house or a car or a bank account. What they owe you is care, sacrifice, and the lessons of life. If they choose to give you more, it is a gift, not an obligation. Gratitude must run deeper than expectation. If respect and thankfulness are missing, then you do not deserve what you seek. And then, the larger truth about human nature. In this world, greed often shouts louder than love. We live in a time when people measure worth by what they can grab, not what they can give. But I have seen with my own eyes that truth does not die. Lies may roar for a while, but truth stands steady. It waits, it endures, and in the end, it wins. Betrayal may shake you, but it does not have to break you. Character, integrity, those are the real assets no one can steal. One small event sealed these reflections in me. A week after receiving Michael's letter, I was walking in the park. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, children's laughter carried across the field, and the sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything gold. I sat on a bench watching two little boys chase each other while their mother clapped from the sidelines. An elderly man with a cane passed by and nodded at me. He said, "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" I nodded back, and for a moment I felt connected to something larger than my pain, larger than my family's mistakes. I thought to myself, this is life. Simple, honest, free. I remembered Linda in those moments. I imagined her walking beside me, her hand warm in mine, her voice whispering, "You chose right, Robert. You stood tall." I smiled at the memory, not with grief, but with gratitude. Gratitude that I had loved, that I had been loved, and that I could still carry that love into the rest of my days. Each day became proof that I had chosen correctly, proof that I had not been broken by betrayal, but shaped by it, proof that I could live alone and still not be lonely, because peace itself was my companion. I often told myself, I don't need their apology. I have myself. I have the truth. And that's enough. The seasons will turn again, as they always do. Winter will cover the garden, spring will bring blossoms, summer will warm the evenings, and autumn will set the leaves aflame. And through it all, I will remain here, steady and free, with my dignity intact. I do not know what will become of Michael and Sophie. Perhaps they will rebuild their lives in some distant place. Perhaps they will continue to stumble. That is their road to walk, not mine. My road is here, tending gardens, reading books, walking through parks, and living with honesty. I wish them no harm, but I do not wish them back into my life. The bridge is gone, and I am at peace with that. As I close this chapter of my life, I leave it with 3 truths. For parents, love must have boundaries, for without them, you raise children who confuse generosity with debt. For children, respect is the greatest gift you can give your parents, greater than money, greater than success. And for all of us, in a world where greed and betrayal can feel louder than love, character is the one treasure no one can strip away. One evening, as I walked home from the park, the sky glowing orange and purple, I whispered to myself, "Each day proves I chose right. I am free. I am at peace. And I owe nothing to anyone but myself and the truth I live by." I opened the door of my home, the familiar creak of the hinge greeting me. The scent of marigolds drifted in from the porch. I set the kettle on the stove, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence fill the room. It was not the silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence of completion. I had survived the storm. I had kept my dignity. And I had learned that in the end, family is not who shares your blood. Family is who respects you. Character is the inheritance you leave behind. And peace is the reward for never letting betrayal define you. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.